Imagine being told that your art is so dangerous it could destroy a nation. What if the very thing that makes you unique was the very thing you were persecuted for? In 1937, the Nazi regime set out to humiliate and erase modern art, but instead they ended up turning it into a global symbol of creative freedom. By the end of this video, you'll see how something meant to be a curse for artists became one of the greatest blessings for modern art as we know it today. Art has always been a way to express the deepest parts of ourselves, and for many of us, it's the one place where we can be completely free. The Nazi campaign against so-called degenerate art wasn't just about silencing artists. It was about controlling culture, ideas, and even the way we see the world. Art, like wildfire, can't be easily contained. And in trying to put it out, the Nazis only fanned the flames of creativity even higher, sparking a movement that still burns bright today. Join me as we dive into the Nazis' war on culture and discover how the art they tried to silence not only survived, but emerged stronger, shaping the world of modern art. On February 1st, 1933, the Reichstag German Parliament building in Berlin, Germany was suddenly filled with Nazi stormtroopers. Their two opposing parties, the Communists and Social Democrats, had offices there, and the stormtroopers were ready to attack. The time for violent action was now, because just 2 days prior, on January 30th, 1933, their leader, Adolf Hitler, was appointed Chancellor of Germany. Immediately there was chaos. Offices at the Reichstag were smashed up as a show of dominance. Activists and opposing party members were beaten up, newspapers were banned. Later that month, the Reichstag building was burned by Nazis and blamed on communists. And it was the fire and fear of an alleged communist takeover that Hitler sought as a great opportunity the very next day to suspend everything. No freedom of speech, no freedom of the press, no freedom of the arts. Already. No more freedom of association, due process, or any civil liberties. Under martial law, the Nazi parliamentary was the new police, and only they were allowed to carry firearms. Those new in power abused it. They beat their way into German political submission with metal-studded jackboots, brass knuckle-fitted fists, and handy batons. There were reports of victims getting robbed of money, valuables, and vehicles. Because of course, the new police could confiscate private property. This is gruesome, but as an example of the early brutality, some people were made to drink oil and urine, and then shot when they fought against it. Adolf Hitler knew how to mandate violence without directly incriminating himself, though. He was good at that, because as he skirted around these new German growing pains, he had a bigger job for himself. Hitler considered himself as the artist of the new and improved German culture. He thought he would shape the worthy Aryan people from his most worthy clay, like some kind of god artist. And to do this, he was going to start by cleaning up the filthy, degenerate art scene. So what exactly made a piece of art degenerate in the eyes of the Nazis? Think of it like a mirror. While traditional art reflects the world as it is, degenerate art shattered that reflection, showing a world full of new possibilities. Dark and light, beautiful and wretched. So for context, in the late 19th and early 20th century, artists detached from academic art and realism. The invention of the camera helped with that influence. There was the sentiment that if we now have a camera that captures things as they are, what do we need painting for? Let's instead capture with art what the camera can't. Our imagination, impressions, our state of mind, and the like. There were many new isms to adopt, so instead of looking externally, some artists chose to look internally. And art was democratized. No academy or salon is needed to express or even sell your works. But there's always those who oppose any kind of change. Wilhelm Weygand, director of the insane asylum in Hamburg, was a political liberal but deeply upset by cultural deviation. He was very concerned with modern art's obsession with the insane. He saw it as a symptom of social degeneracy for sick and troubled times. Then there's Count Joseph Arthur de Gobineau, which is where we can find the roots of modern degeneracy theory. In his 1850s essay about the inequality of human races, whites were at the top of the hierarchy and Aryans were even higher, followed by a ranking of all the other lower classes. He thought that mixing races degenerated the higher races, but benefited or were neutral to the lower races. Basically, he was trying to justify racism with his made-up science.
A nation is degenerate when the blood of its founders no longer flows from its veins, but has been gradually deteriorated by successive foreign admixtures, so that the nation, while maintaining its original name, is no longer composed of the same elements.
Max Nordau was a Jewish physician, and in his 1892 book, Entartung, Degeneration, he thought that creative direction of the era was a symptom of moral insanity. He diagnosed an affliction for impressionists, eyeball trembling and false color due to hysteria, and he thought that antisocial vermin, as he put it, should be jailed or sent to an insane asylum so they wouldn't spread their sickness to the rest of society.
Degenerates are not always criminals, prostitutes, anarchists, and pronounced lunatics. They are often authors and artists. These, however, manifest the same mental characteristics, and for the most part the same somatic features as those who satisfy their unhealthy impulses with the knife of the assassin or the bomb of the dynamiter, instead of with pen and paper.
Degenerate art was basically anything that wasn't realism. As the 20th century marched onward, the world and cultures changed like never before. And where there is change, there is progress for some, but also the threat to others. We all know that art can be an expression of emotion, but what happens when those emotions come from a place society deems broken? I'd like to introduce you to someone who saw value and fascination in asylum art, Hans Prinzhorn. Prinzhorn had a complex personality. He was very intelligent, kind, musical, and otherwise creative. He was an all-around attractive person, both physically and intellectually. But he could also be described by those who knew him as vain, restless, and defiant. He came from an educated family and found his academic career easy. Good for him. He majored in art history, philosophy, and jumped around among some of Germany's best universities. He ended up in Munich in the spring of 1906. Munich was a vibrant city, rivaling Paris and Vienna in its richness and variety of cultural arts. It was a place where art thrived, perfect for a young man who studied the arts to live in. His exposure to everything Munich had to offer, and his degrees, made him the person who was at the right place and time, and had the right interests and accolades to make the connection between art and madness. But not so fast. First, there was the First World War. In 1914, he was drafted as a medic because, at the time, Prinzhorn was working on a medical degree to become a doctor. In 1917, Prinzhorn met Karl Wilmans, a senior army doctor and psychiatrist in civilian life. This connection is vital to our story because before the war, Wilmans had been very interested in the small collection of art done by psychiatric patients at the Heidelberg Clinic. They were used as teaching aids for him, but he wanted to use them further for something else. Wilmans' idea was to study them to gain some kind of diagnosis for their patients. Because of their shared interests, Prinzhorn and Wilmans clicked and would talk for hours about the images these patients would produce and their theories about the patient's thought process behind making them. Then, a year later, when on the front line, Prinzhorn was injured in a battle. Because of his injury and the war pretty much being over by then, he was sent to heal up in a hotel in Wiesbaden and was awarded the Iron Cross. Grateful to be done with this part of his life, he couldn't stop thinking about the psychiatric patient art that he and Wilmans talked so much about. Now back to his civilian life, he wanted to do more with that. Wilmans survived the war and returned to his old post, but this time as a clinic director. He used his position to give Prinzhorn a job as a psychiatric assistant so he could take on the project of growing and studying the psychiatric art collection. Prinzhorn's goal was to assemble the greatest collection of art by psychiatric patients from across Germany that the world had ever seen. Post-World War I shell shock left many, especially men, traumatized. The asylums of the day held many more that were not directly affected by the war. It was a convenient place to dump inconvenient people. The asylums were not a place for nurturing or healing, but more of a holding place. The patients of these institutions lived very boxed-in lives, taking the same steps every day in an endless routine. Prisoners of crime could possibly eventually be released, but in contrast, asylum patients with no apparent cure to their ailments were never meant to leave. After World War I, conditions in these asylums only got worse due to the economic despair and food shortage that all of Germany was experiencing. Some patients, particularly the already weaker ones, starved to death. For example, this is a quote from Karl Bonhoeffer, chairman of the German National Psychiatric Association.
"We were forced by the terrible exigencies of war to ascribe a different value to the life of the individual. We had to get used to watching our patients die of malnutrition in vast numbers, almost approving this in the knowledge that perhaps the healthy could be kept alive through these sacrifices."
And while Bonhoeffer was trying to approach this more from a pragmatic view rather than a malevolent one, others were malevolent. Retired legal expert Carl Binding would say,
"These incurable idiots were not merely worthless, but actually existences of negative value, a travesty of real human beings."
Together with Alfred Hock, a professor of psychiatry, they set out to propose a plan to get rid of the psychiatric patients through involuntary euthanasia. They not only saw these people as less than human, but also as weighing down a financially struggling Germany with their burdenous lives. They echo a resounding phrase in the Nazi Party, lebenswertes Leben, life unworthy of life. Everybody across Germany was struggling with hunger and security. It's in this climate that the nation's psychiatric patients became a target. Despite their grim and hopeless reality, some in asylums across Germany would paint or make art in some form to self-soothe. This has always been going on, and how could it not? It's part of human nature to create. Drawings and sculptures were common among the patients, but you're probably wondering, did they have art supplies? No, they didn't, unless they were gifted some, so people got creative with the materials. We have Karl Genzel, who carved anthropomorphic figures from wood. He was a bricklayer and construction worker before being hospitalized due to his violent outbursts and partial amputation of one of his legs. Like a majority of the patients, his diagnosis was schizophrenia. His delusions were religiously themed, and his sculptures were animal-like and highly abstracted. Before he had wood to use, he created his sculptures with bits of chewed-up bread, compounding them together like clay. Genzel created a unique style of art centered on the figure of Jesus Christ, where he mixed different ideas and changed the usual image of the crucifix into creatures with big heads and skinny legs. He's quoted saying about his work,
"When I have a piece of wood in front of me, a hypnosis is in it. If I follow it, something comes out. Otherwise, there's going to be a fight."
His talent for abstracting the human figure caught the attention of Paul Klee, who admired Genzel's work and adapted it into his own modernist creations. Then there's Agnes Richter, whose medium was textile. Richter used to be a seamstress in Dresden, but was arrested and committed to the Dresden City Lunatic Asylum in 1893, then moved to Hubertusburg Asylum in 1895, where she stayed the rest of her life. Her offense was officially noted as disturbing the peace and trespassing, and she may have been sent to the psychiatric hospital at the request of her father and brothers, and maybe even her neighbors. It's not clear exactly what she did, but her case notes offer a different view. She repeatedly told doctors that her money had been stolen and that she wanted to take legal action against the people who had put her in the asylum. Her admission notes to Hubertusburg state a diagnosis of paranoia with auditory hallucinations. During her first year at Hubertusburg, Richter started embroidering a small jacket that she made to fit her small frame. This jacket stood out from the typical clothing worn in asylums at the time, making it interesting why she was allowed to create and wear something so unique. The jacket was made from institutional linen and covered inside and out with what seems to be autobiographical text. Richter stitched memories from her life, but this jacket is tough to read. She used an old dialect of Gothic script, and writing overlaps from one side to the other, with some threads worn away over time, making it nearly impossible to completely decipher. Some phrases are legible, though. Things like, "my white stockings," "no cherries," "brother freedom," "my money," "no one in Hubertusburg," "I plunge headlong into disaster." Katharina Detzel, born in Luxembourg in 1872, was institutionalized in 1907 after performing abortions and sabotaging a railway line as a form of political protest. She strongly resisted her confinement and made several attempts to escape. Driven by her desire for freedom, she crafted keys and runners from wood and created figurines out of bread dough, including one of Shakespeare. Detzel also worked on a life-sized human figure with wings, and made a male doll which she hung up in her single cell. The figure designed to resemble a scientist or physician with glasses, a beard, and a penis. He was meant to convey authority. Sometimes she would dance with him, other times she would yell at him. Detzel hoped that by showing the doctors that doll, she could convince them to move her from her cell to a dormitory where she might have a better chance to escape. She warned the doctors that if she remained isolated, she would soon become as lifeless as the doll. However, her efforts were in vain. The doctors did not respond to her threats, and instead removed nearly everything from her cell, leaving her with only something to sleep on. These works, and many more, poured in from all over Germany at Prinzhorn and Wollmann's request letters. There was a great variety in the art. Aside from drawings and paintings, there were collages, composed music, and some handmade books. Some works were done on better material like sketch pads and actual canvases, while others were on scraps of newspaper, toilet paper, empty envelopes, paper labels, and the like. Patients were creating self-portraits, landscapes, interior scenes, text, fantastical combinations of all of the above. After receiving hundreds of art pieces from many clinics, Prinzhorn realized that this wasn't just interesting in a psychiatric sense, this was interesting art. While most people dismissed these works as mere madness, he saw genius in the chaos. His book, Artistry of the Mentally Ill, was finally ready to be published in 1922, and it became widely popular and had a significant impact on the art of the world. Paul Klee, one of the most notable modern artists, was deeply inspired by the art featured in Prinzhorn's book. Klee, already a prominent figure in the modern art movement, found the asylum artists' raw creativity and emotional depth to be intriguing and instructive. The way these patients expressed themselves without formal training or concern for traditional artistic rules resonated with Klee's own desire to explore new visual languages and abstract forms. Max Ernst was particularly captivated by the way asylum art seemed to emerge directly from the subconscious, free from the constraints of formal training and societal expectations. This aligned with the surrealist goal of accessing the deeper, more primal aspects of the mind through art. Ernst saw in the works of Prinzhorn's patients purity and authenticity, which he sought to replicate in his own work. Forest and Dove from 1927. This painting exemplifies Ernst's use of frottage and the surreal, dreamlike quality he sought to evoke, much like the art that he admired from Prinzhorn's book. The dense, textured forests in the painting has an eerie, otherworldly feel, reflecting Ernst's interest in the mysterious and irrational. Inspired by asylum artists' art, unstructured and evocative nature, Ernst's approach to collages, where he would combine seemingly unrelated images to create bizarre, dreamlike scenes, can also be traced back to his fascination with the asylum artists' fragmented and often disjointed compositions. The way that these artists combine elements in unexpected ways to express their inner worlds deeply influenced Ernst's own method in collage work. Jean Dubuffet, a French artist and sculptor, is another example. Dubuffet saw something special in this asylum art, something raw and unfiltered and real that he felt was missing from traditional Western art. This inspiration led him to create the Art Brut movement, which celebrated the work of self-taught outsider artists, including those with mental illnesses. Dubuffet was tired of the conventional art that he thought was too polished and disconnected from real human emotions. The art made by psychiatric patients, which didn't follow any rules and came straight from the artist's inner worlds, seemed much more genuine to him. He loved how these works were full of raw creativity and untouched by any kind of expectation from formal art education. The Butterflies series is one example of Dubuffet's work that shows this influence. These paintings are full of vibrant, abstract shapes that seem almost chaotic. Still, they have a lively energy that mirrors the unfiltered creativity he saw in the art of psychiatric patients. One takeaway from Prinzhorn's book, Artistry of the Mentally Ill, and Charlie English's book, The Gallery of Miracles and Madness, is that mental illness didn't always mean that a person's abilities were getting worse. Many of the people who created art in these asylums showed that their creativity and skill remained strong despite their mental health struggles. Their art often revealed a lot about their inner worlds and emotions, suggesting that their artistic talents were still very much intact, even if their mental health was challenging or deteriorating. Also, you couldn't always figure out a patient's diagnosis just by looking at their art. Art provided only a part of the story, and to truly understand a person's mental health, you need more than just their creative work. You need a complete picture of their experiences and their conditions. The art alone might not show the whole range of their mental state or help pinpoint any specific diagnosis, but many did try to diagnose it anyway. Arguably the most dangerous diagnosis made on the basis of art came from the Nazis. The success of Prinzhorn's book exposed a generation of artists to new ways of looking at art, but Adolf Hitler and his followers saw it as a threat to German culture and as a poison to everything good. So obsessed with his idealized ideas of what art and humanity should be, Hitler marched forward with his totalitarian plans to reshape Germany. Every means possible was thrown at this goal. The Nazis controlled speech, films, newspaper, and even the radio to achieve their goals. Every bit of media was aimed at demonizing Jews, Bolsheviks, and the Weimar Republic, while promoting German nationalism in the Nazi state. On July 19, 1937, the Nazis held the Degenerate art exhibition. It was a major event designed to denounce modern art that the regime considered unacceptable. It was held at the Institute of Archaeology in Munich's Hofgarten. This location was chosen because of its dark, narrow rooms, which helped create a dramatic effect. Many artworks were displayed without frames and partially covered with insulting slogans. Things like, "Madness becomes method," "Nature as seen by sick minds," "An insult to German womanhood," "The ideal Cretan in whore," "Deliberate sabotage of national defense." The exhibition featured works by artists like Paul Klee and Max Ernst, whose styles were seen as too abstract or experimental, or influenced by Jewish or leftist ideas. The Nazis displayed these pieces in a way that was meant to shock and disgust viewers, using the show to convince people that this kind of art was corrupt and harmful. The Degenerate art exhibition was a key part of the Nazis' broader effort to control culture and suppress any artistic expression that didn't fit their narrow ideology. They used this event to push their own artistic agenda, claiming that the art that they promoted was pure and aligned with their vision of the perfect society. So while the public saw the bad art at one gallery, down the street was the Great German Art Exhibition, held at the Haus of Deutschen Kunst. The collection was meant to showcase the classical and racially pure art favored by the Nazis' regime, compared to the Degenerate art exhibition, which drew huge crowds. Modern critics considered the show mediocre and only attracted about half as many visitors. To highlight some of the twisted ways the Nazis saw modern art, one could simply have to listen to Hitler rant. He thought that because colors in modern art were unnatural, such as painting a landscape blue and a sky green and clouds yellow, there had to be something wrong with the artist's eyesight. If there was nothing wrong with the artist's eyesight, then it must have been mental illness. Either way, they should be prevented from passing along their diseased genetics. And if it was neither of those things, then the reasons must be that they were a scammer, in which case the justice system needed to deal with them. So just to recap, in Hitler's mind, either medical or criminal, the artists making modern art needed to be stopped and make their way to the concentration camp. The first victims of Nazi concentration camps were primarily political opponents of the regime, such as communists, socialists, trade unionists, and other individuals who were seen as a threat to Hitler's power. This included members of the opposition parties, journalists, and anyone who openly criticized the Nazi government. The Nazis also targeted other groups that they deemed undesirable, including Jews, Roma people, homosexuals, and, of course, people with physical and mental disabilities. The Nazis justified the creation of concentration camps by portraying these individuals as enemies of the state who needed to be removed from society to maintain order and protect the German people. They claimed that these enemies were a danger to the nation's security and that their imprisonment was necessary to preserve the purity and strength of the Aryan race. This propaganda remained strong under Nazi rule and was used to gain public support or at least passive acceptance of the camps, somehow allowing the Nazis to carry out their brutal policies with little opposition. It's truly insane and difficult to understand how they got away with so much murder. For example, at the Hartham Killing Center, the stench of death from the black smoke in the ovens was so strong that nearby villagers would complain that they couldn't even eat. Even after a long day of work, they couldn't eat because of the repulsion of the smell. The Hartham manager, Christian Worth, ordered a group of these villagers to a bar so that he could inform them that the stench was from distilling old waste oils. Then he threatened them that if anybody spread any more rumors about burning the dead in ovens, that he would have them sent to a concentration camp. Still, though, it wouldn't stop people from talking or even local children from using insults like, "You're so dumb, you're going to bake in the oven," or stuff like that. Or, "You will ride the gray bus," because they knew where that was going. Hans Prinzhorn may not have been the first person to take asylum art seriously as real art, but he was the first to systematically gather and catalog and display it with so much care and respect. His collection contained a lot of variety, eventually amassing over 5,000 pieces created by more than 450 patients. Prinzhorn's goal was to study these works not just as medical documents, but as genuine artistic expressions that provided insight into the minds of the creators. After Prinzhorn's death in 1933, the collection remained at the University of Heidelberg, but it largely fell into obscurity for several decades. But finally, in 1962, a psychiatrist in training at the Heidelberg Clinic named Maria Raveschwenk was drawn to a pair of mysterious wooden cabinets that she'd noticed sit undisturbed for a long time. She wondered what was in them and why they were locked up. During a slow day at the clinic, she decided to ask a professor about them, and he was able to tell her where she might be able to find the key. So she went ahead and looked inside. These old forgotten cabinets were packed to the brim with Prinzhorn's collection of asylum art. The neglected material was organized into folders and drawers. Maria Raveschwenk took it upon herself to restore and display these works of art again. The bigger job at hand, though, was to find the real names of these artists, since most of them were changed in order to protect their privacy for Prinzhorn's book. In the process of finding the real identities, their biographies would also be uncovered. Sadly, though, many of these ended up being murdered by Nazis in the concentration camps. In 2001, the University of Heidelberg established the Prinzhorn Museum, officially known as the Prinzhorn Collection. This museum was created to honor Prinzhorn's legacy and to ensure that the artworks he collected could be appreciated by the public. Today you can visit the Prinzhorn Museum as it continues to exhibit these works, preserving the memory of the artists and the historical context that they were created in. The Nazi regime's campaign against modern art was as much a war on culture and creativity as it was on the artists themselves. What started as an attempt to suppress unconventional art only highlighted its significance and resilience. The label Degenerate art became a badge of defiance and a testament to the power of artistic expression. It teaches me a valuable lesson about the human need to create, and how it shouldn't and can't be completely snuffed out. We've explored how the Nazis branded modern art as dangerous, but the line between genius and madness has long been blurred in the art world. Next, we'll uncover the peculiar tale of Richard Dadd, an artist whose abrupt descent into insanity led to the murder of his own father, and a life in the asylum. Click here to find out how this tragic event shaped Dadd's eerie and mesmerizing work.